Frank Sinatra once called him pal more times than anyone could count, and then one ordinary night at a hotel bar, that closeness ended for good. No slow fade, no public fight that made the papers right away, just silence where decades of friendship used to be. What actually happened that night explains more about Dean Martin than almost anything else in his long career, and by the end of this, you'll understand exactly why a man who built his whole life around charm finally walked away from his closest friend. Dino Paul Crocetti came into the world on June 7, 1917 in Steubenville, Ohio, the son of an Italian barber and a mother who held the family together through years that offered little comfort. Money was scarce, and young Dino found an early outlet in boxing, fighting under the name Kid Crochet at just 15 years old. He couldn't afford tape for his hands, so he fought bare-knuckled, and the price showed up later as a crooked nose and a scarred lip. He joked that he won only one of 12 fights, but the ring taught him toughness that would carry him through everything ahead. New York came next, where he and a friend named Sonny King were broke enough to charge spectators to watch them box bare-knuckle inside their own apartment. No ring, no gloves, nothing but hunger driving them forward. Work in an illegal casino followed, first stacking chips, then running the wheel, but singing stayed the constant thread underneath it all. He called himself Dino Martini at first, borrowing the name from an opera singer, and his smooth phrasing caught the ear of bandleader Sammy Watkins, who told him bluntly to change his name. Dean Martin walked out of that conversation, and a new career walked in with him. Marriage came in 1941 to Elizabeth Ann McDonald, 4 children followed, and by 1949 that chapter had closed. New York clubs in the mid-1940s were full of singers chasing the same Hollywood dream, but Dean's break arrived through comedy rather than music. In August of 1944, he met a young comic named Jerry Lewis at the Glass Hat Club, and Jerry remembered Dean walking up and simply telling him he'd seen the act and thought the kid was funny. 2 years later, on July 24, 1946, they debuted as a team at the 500 Club in Atlantic City, and the first show bombed completely. The owner gave them an ultimatum: fix it by the second show or pack up and leave. Backstage, with no script and no real plan, they decided Dean would sing while Jerry caused chaos around him, and that improvised chaos turned into the act that made them famous. Jerry stumbled out dressed as a clumsy waiter, dropping plates and crashing into Dean mid-song, and the crowd that had sat silent an hour earlier was suddenly roaring. From that night forward, Martin and Lewis became unstoppable, headlining the Copacabana, appearing on The Ed Sullivan Show in 1948, and landing a Paramount Pictures deal that turned their 1949 film debut into a box office hit. They controlled their own productions, which meant real money started flowing in, but underneath the success, Dean had started to feel boxed in as the straight man, while Jerry pulled focus night after night. Resentment built quietly for years until July 25, 1956, exactly a decade after their first show together, when they performed as a team for the final time and walked away from each other for good. Dean's solo career didn't just survive the split, it accelerated, and by 1958, he was starring alongside Frank Sinatra in Some Came Running, a film that sparked a friendship neither of them expected to define their lives. That friendship became the foundation of the Rat Pack, a name the group never actually chose for themselves. It originally belonged to Humphrey Bogart's old crowd, and Lauren Bacall had coined it after a wild night out. Dean and Frank, along with Sammy Davis Jr., Peter Lawford, and Joey Bishop, preferred to call themselves The Summit, but the original nickname stuck regardless. Vegas became their playground, especially the Sands Hotel, where audiences never knew what they'd get from night to night. Ballads turning into jokes, turning into tap numbers from Sammy, all of it unscripted and electric. They mocked each other mercilessly on stage, nothing off limits, yet beneath the martinis and one-liners sat genuine conviction. Both Dean and Frank refused to play venues that barred Black or Jewish performers, using their fame to push back against the era's prejudice in a way that cost them bookings, but mattered more than money. Off the stage, Dean's personal life moved through 3 marriages. 1 week after his 1949 divorce from Elizabeth, he married Jean Beager, a former beauty queen, and that marriage lasted 2 decades and produced 3 more children, while Jean raised all 7 kids as her own. It ended in divorce in 1969, and Dean later joked that he wasn't gentleman enough to let his wife file first. A 3rd marriage to Catherine Hahn in 1973 brought an adopted daughter named Sasha, but ended within a few years, and Dean never married again. Family remained the center of his world regardless, and no child meant more to him than Dean Paul, known as Dino, a son who sang, acted, played professional tennis, and became a fighter pilot with the California Air National Guard. On March 21, 1986, Dino's jet vanished during a training flight over the California mountains, and the search that followed involved military aircraft personally requested by President Reagan, a longtime friend of the family. Sinatra stood beside Dean during the wait, having lost his own mother in a plane crash in that same mountain range a decade earlier, But nothing could change what the search teams eventually found 3 days later: wreckage and no survivors. Dean was never the same afterward. Sinatra tried pulling him back into the spotlight with a reunion tour, thinking the old energy might help him heal, but Dean hated every night of it, forgetting lyrics, slurring through jokes, and once flicking a lit cigarette into the crowd. After a rough show in New York, he slammed his hotel door on Frank and Sammy, boarded his private jet without a word, and flew home alone, ending the tour and, in many ways, ending his public life as the world had known it. But the real break with Sinatra had started years earlier, on the night of June 7, 1966, Dean's 49th birthday, at the Polo Lounge inside the Beverly Hills Hotel. The group, including Sinatra enforcer Jilly Rizzo, was loud enough that a nearby guest, businessman Frederick Wiseman, asked them to quiet down. Accounts of what followed differ depending on who's telling it, but every version ends the same way. Wiseman ended up unconscious on the floor, his skull fractured, and he spent days in a coma before doctors were even sure he'd survive. Dean came home that night and told his teenage daughter only that Frank had blown a fuse again and couldn't let things go. No charges were ever filed, and Wiseman eventually recovered, but for Dean, the message was clear. He valued quiet nights and stable family life, while Frank thrived on chaos that always seemed to find him no matter where he went. Slowly, the calls between them stopped. The invitations stopped. And a friendship that once defined an entire era of American entertainment simply faded into distance neither man ever fully explained in public. Lung cancer arrived in September of 1993, and Dean declined the surgery that might have extended his life, choosing instead to spend his final years quietly with the family he'd always protected. He retired from public life in early 1995 and passed away that Christmas Day in his Beverly Hills home, 78 years old, dying on the exact same date his own mother had died 29 years earlier. The man who built an empire on charm and a velvet voice left the world having already lost the two things that mattered most to him long before the end: his son and the friend who once stood beside him through everything.